So first I'm gonna do my dedication in about 2 minutes. I just want to wait for a few more people to get on. Um, but last week's class, we talked about Tehillim as being kind of a mantra for our spiritual lives, for our connection to God, and we talked about a lot. We focused on Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, and the idea that if you look at the content of Tehillim, it teaches us what it is that we're supposed to be thinking about in our relationship to God, both as individuals and as a nation. And we talked about the idea that every single aspect of our lives was somehow experienced by David and recorded in his words. And we ended up with the idea that Tehillim is so powerful that even just the mere saying of the words of Tehillim has an impact somehow on the heavens. What I want to do today, though, is really focus on the idea that Tehillim itself, if we really look at the words themselves, they are a how-to book, a how-to guide of how to connect to God. And now, before we continue, I want to just dedicate this class. This class is dedicated to my father, Professor Billy Shriver, Ze'ev Elimelech Ben Yitzchak Isaac. He passed away this summer. My dad was a physicist and an astronomer. And his whole life work, aside from being the most incredible family man, he was a quantum physicist. And so his life was all about probing the mysteries of the world. And as a physicist, at every family occasion, what did he like to quote? He loved to quote Einstein. And so, and one of his favorite quotes was that you never get old if you live life with the curiosity of a child. And so that quote inspired this class. I knew that this was a class that I wanted to give both in his memory, but also more than in his memory, but to give us a legacy of the lessons that I learned from him. So with that, let's begin our class. Let's look at the first picture. I'm going to share the first picture. I was telling Shelley before that I'm very lucky because my kids are great travelers. I am not. I've traveled some places, but my kids have been to the most beautiful places, and they share with me the most beautiful pictures. And so here we are. This is my son, Yossi, climbing the Alps this year. And so before we start the class, I want everyone just to zone in on this picture for a second and just feel it. What is the sense? Like when you look at that picture, how does it make you feel? When you look at this picture, how does it make you feel? Anyone?
It's kind of awe-inspiring. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, hold on to that word. Awe-inspiring, beautiful. Any other thoughts when you look at it?
It makes me feel humble and small in the presence of such grandeur.
Awesome. Okay, I was looking for that. So right there's an awesomeness, and there's a certain sense of humility of, look at, as a mom, I was really worried when I got this picture. I'm like, you have a long way to go, Yossi. But there's really a sense of right, like you said, the humility of the hiker, in the face of this daunting, beautiful, landscape that he's a part of. So hold on to that. And I want to ask you a question. What if first of all, how would you I know here I talked about faith, but instead of talking about faith today, I want to talk about spirituality. And I want to ask you, how would you define the idea of spirituality? What is spirituality to you?
I think it's a feeling inside. For me, it's a feeling of community. It's a
Mm.
feeling of being part of something with other people. It isn't about me and a being. It's
Mhm.
about me and all beings.
Ah, okay, great. Hold on to that. Any other ideas? So it's part of being part, you are a part of something bigger than yourself. In your case, it's a community. Any other thoughts?
For
Um,
me, it's connecting to the soul, the heart, the mind,
Ah,
as
okay.
opposed to the body.
Okay, so it's connecting with something not physical, right? It's something. Um,
I agree.
anything else? Any other ideas?
No, I agree with Ellen. It's being able to feel the universe.
Yeah, okay. So when you talk about spirituality, what we're talking about is connecting to something that's bigger than ourselves. And so Suzanne, you said community, our soul, right? It's something that's infinite. You know, our bodies are finite, our souls are infinite. And in our case, what I want to talk about is, since we're talking about Tehillim, it's also about the idea of spirituality is about connecting to something that is greater than ourselves. And so now, if I were to ask you, what is, and what we're going to see today is how Tehillim teaches us and gives us kind of paves the way for our path to being spiritual beings. So if I were to say to you, what is a single word that helps you connect to that spiritual self, or that helps you connect to the idea of spirituality? Can you think of a word? Shelley, don't say your word. So we're going to get to it. Okay. But I'll give you a hint. And it's also, it's an idea that is, definitely, it's been around, in Judaism, and in monotheism since Abraham. And so let's look at it together. Okay. So, well, before we get there, I just want to talk about Rav Hirsch, who was our man last week, and this is connected to our word. He, at the age of 88, I think, like right before he passed away, he packed up his bags, and he told his students, "I'm leaving." And his students said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I am going to walk." I don't know if he's walking, but I'm taking a trek to the Alps. But because he said, when I go up to heaven, God is going to say to me, "Shimshon, did you see the Alps?" So I'm trying to give you little hints about what it is, that our man, Heschel, who we're going to be talking about, thinks is the key to spirituality, and to what Tehillim also sees as the pathway to being a spiritual being. So let's talk about, anyone know what's the famous midrash? How did Abraham come to believe in God? So this isn't in the text, but if you look at the stories that are told about Abraham's youth, does anyone know what is the story that is told of Abraham and how he came to believe in God? Anyone know? So I'll share it with you. So Abraham, when he was a young boy, he looked up to the heavens and he saw the sun and he began to worship the sun. But what happened at the end of the day? At the end of the day, the sun set and the moon came out. So he said the sun must not be the God, it must be the moon. But then what happened at the end of the day? At the end of the night, the sun rose again. And so Abraham was in a quandary. He questioned by looking at the heavens and by looking at the world that was around him. He understood that there was something powerful that existed beyond himself, but he couldn't put his hands on what it was. And when God saw that Abraham was seeking, what did God do? He spoke to Abraham and he said, Abraham, you're the one. Lech lecha, go take a journey, and you are going to be my person. But the text itself actually says something else. In last week's parsha, anyone know when the first time it talks about God, Abraham having faith in God? Do you know when that happens? You know, when was it? Suzanne, do you know? When's the first time that it says that Abraham actually had faith in God? And that he believed. So I can't, Suzanne, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. But so the first time is in last week's parsha. Do you remember when Abraham is unsure whether or not he's like, you're promising me all these things, God. You're promising me you're promising me children. You're promising me the land, but I have no one. I have nothing. And so what does God do? God takes him out he takes him out of the world, literally. He takes him out above the globe above into the heavens, and he shows him the stars, and he says, count the stars, Abraham, and you will be as many of the stars. You should know that he already told Abraham that he would be like as many as the dust of the earth, right? But that didn't do it for Abraham. You know what made Abraham truly believe and connect to God? It was seeing the heavens, seeing the stars in the sky. We talked last week about one of the Tehillim in which it says that God is able to count and know the names of every star in the sky. And when Abraham saw that the stars that God had created, he said, wow. He said, wow, this is a God that I know has the ability to keep his promise to me. And I know that what he has told me about a nation that's coming from me and a land that is promised to me, I know that it's going to be. So what do we see? Are you getting a sense of what is the connection? What is the word that helps mankind connect to something beyond themselves? What is that word? It's living with a sense of, Shelley said it before, it's living with a sense of wonder, a sense of awe at the world around us. And so what we're going to do together now is to explore this whole idea of what it means to live a life of wonder. So we see it with Abraham, and 1,000 years later, Rambam in his code in the Mishnah Torah, in which he talks about the fundamentals of the how-tos of how to be Jewish and how to connect to God. He says, you know how we get to connect to God? And this is what he says: what is the path to attain love and fear of God? When a person contemplates, here's that word, his wondrous and great deeds and creations, and appreciates his wisdom. When a person sees, right, looks out into the grandness, right, of the Grand Canyon, and we were just talking about grandchildren, Shelley, right? And the wonder of a life being brought into this world. You can help but begin to wonder and begin to connect to that something that is beyond us, that created it all. And that's what Rambam says. If you want to begin to connect to God, you know what the first step is? You have to look at the world that God created with a sense of wonder. And then when you begin to look at that world, look at that picture, look at that. I think that's my son looking out into the Alps. When you look out into that vast beyond, what do you want to do? You begin to want to and yearn to understand, right? What is that something beyond us? And that's what Rambam does, is he quotes a Tehillim that we're going to learn together. He says, not this one, the next one we're going to learn together. My soul thirsts for the Lord, for the living God. He says that when you see how this awesome, the world that God created, what do you want to do, right? You want to begin to get to know, the photographer, to get to know the artist. And he continues and he talks about the idea that Ellen, you mentioned before, that when the more you contemplate the world, it also gives you a sense of humility, right? Who am I in this grand world? He says, when he continues to reflect on these same matters, he will immediately recoil in awe and fear, appreciating how he is a tiny, lowly creature, right? But at the same time, he is right at the center of God's world. And that we're going to be studying that in the Tehillim that he quotes here. He says, what is man, right? When I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, I wonder what is man that you should have created him, that you should think about him. That's what God, who created this most beautiful world, who created the Alps, who created the Grand Canyon, he created it for what purpose? So that man could enjoy it, so that man could be a partner in his continuing his creation. And who is this man who, a man of the hour, who articulated this as this idea of wonder leads to awe, leads to connection. Of course, it's going to be David, our shepherd David, our shepherd king, but it's also Abraham Joshua Heschel. And who is Abraham Joshua Heschel? And then we are going to meet him by seeing through an excerpt to an interview that he literally gave weeks before he passed away. So Abraham Joshua Heschel was a contemporary philosopher. He was born in Poland. He was educated in the University of Berlin as a philosopher. He came from a family of great Hasidic Rebbes. So he grew up in that milieu of both an appreciation of secular knowledge and what the world has to offer, but also he had this Hasidic soul to him. Interestingly, for our purposes, in the 30s, he took over Martin Buber's position at the Adult Continuing Education Center in Frankfurt, Germany. So he was the head of J-Learn in his time until the Nazis came to power, kicked him out of Germany, sent him back to Poland. And thank God, just before Poland was invaded, he ended up he was rescued literally by Hebrew Union College, who got him out in Poland and brought him to Cincinnati, where he was until 1946. And then he was stolen away by JTS. And he was there till his death in 1972. And he was a prolific writer. He like Hirsch, very much wanted to show his contemporaries. He wanted to infuse modern life with the understanding, with the idea that being Jewish and connecting to God was not an anachronistic concept, that actually the idea of being a spiritual being, living in the presence of God, living with a God consciousness, as Hirsch said, was something that was actually very relevant. And not only was it very relevant, but it really would imbues the life of the sophisticated man with meaning. And that's what Hirsch last week we were talking about was trying to do with his works, with his life works. And that's what Heschel, holding on to Hirsch, wanted to do the same. When he came to America, he was coming from a very sophisticated European community, and he came to America, and he saw that he saw a lot of he saw that people, not only Jewish people, but society in general, was losing the sense of spirituality. And he felt that society as a whole was really losing something. By not having that peace to color its life. And he became a spokesman in many different ways, a modern day prophet, trying to infuse the world that he found himself in with meaning. And we're going to see later, he also became very good friends with another modern day prophet of his time, with Martin Luther King. So let's go to Heschel. So interestingly, I don't know if anyone of you ever knew about or ever had the opportunity to see this, but NBC from 1944 till even saying NBC is a little anachronistic with all the different, in this day and age with Roku and everything, but NBC from 1944 till 1988 actually had a religious show called The Internal Light. It was a show that was done together with the JTS. And in 1972, Carl Stern interviewed Abraham Joshua Heschel. And first of all, I don't know if any of you know who Carl Stern is. Carl Stern was not just like any random journalist. He was the journalist who covered, I believe, Watergate, Patty Hearst trial, Supreme Court. He was a journalist. And this interview, I'm going to send out a recording of the interview, because I became obsessed with this interview, and even more obsessed with Abraham Heschel after listening to how powerfully he spoke. Just you should know also that he is the most poetic, and I don't know if any of you have ever read his works, The Prophet, God's Search for Man, Sabbath. They are the most eloquent, poetic words, and they are written by a man for whom English was his seventh language. And so listening to him speak is really, it's just like my father said, it's a person who lived a life always with the curiosity of the child. And he said more, Carl Stern, he must have mentioned at some point this. He says, what keeps me alive is my ability to be surprised. That's what he said. He says, Abraham Heschel says, what keeps him alive in the sense of truly living, it's his ability to look at the world with a sense of wow. And what I loved, and so Carl Stern asked him, he said to him, what does that mean? What has surprised you lately? And I loved his answer, because the truth is, this is something that I always had a problem with, this pasuk in this verse in Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes, it says that there's nothing new under the sun. And I never liked that phrase, because to me, look outside, right? No two people are the same, right? No day is the same. And to say that there is nothing new under the sun, it seems really sacrilegious, right, to the world that God created. And that's what Heschel actually says. He says, I totally disagree with that statement. I would say there is nothing stale under the sun. Do you know what he says? Except human beings. Ouch. Right? What does he say? He says the only thing, right? That's saying that there's nothing under new the sun. It's our own faulty perspective. Things aren't new because we fail to look at the world with fresh eyes. And my son, who's a teacher, every day he writes at the top of his blackboard, he writes a verse from Tehillim. And what's that verse from Tehillim? Zeh hayom asa Hashem nagila v'nismecha bo. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it. And what's the meaning? Why does he write that every day on the board? What is he telling us? What is it? And what is David telling us in his Psalms? Right? What is he telling us? He's saying there is everything new under the sun. There is not a day that is the same. There is not a moment that is the same as the moment that came before. And Heschel goes on to say, he says, there are a billion people in the world, and no two of us look the same, even identical twins, right? There have been I don't know the number, but of people that have existed since the beginning of time, and no two have been the same. What a world. So what is Heschel telling us? He is telling us that how do we connect to something beyond ourselves? How do we exercise our spiritual bone? Okay? The secret is by living life with a sense of wonder. And now what I want to do with you is I want to now go to Tehillim and see how David HaMelech, King David, our shepherd. I mean, it's an amazing thing. But as I'm reading Tehillim, and also now as I live in Israel, I love the imagery of the landscape that David incorporates, because I understand it anew. When I look out at the mountains outside my door or the hills of Jerusalem, because I can almost envision, as he's writing the words of Tehillim, of Psalms, that he was looking at these very places. And I'm going to tell you a special experience that I had as we go through the Tehillim. So now let's look at our first Tehillim. And what Heschel says, first of all, let's just take a second. Let's look at the picture. This, I think, is a picture of Yellowstone Park, I think. And it's my son. I would like to say that he's reading Tehillim, but he's not. But it's my son studying Torah, and we're going to see how this picture exactly mirrors the Tehillim that we're about to learn. So first of all, I want to just tell you something. What did Heschel say? He's much like Maimonides and much like Avraham. He says that wonder, seeing something wondrous, what does it lead to? It leads to a sense of awe. What is a sense of awe? It's a sense of what Ellen was saying, that sense of like love and fear and feeling majesty and feeling humility. That's awe. It's not fear in like a scary sense, but it's like that kind of like, wow. So awe leads to wonder, leads to awe, leads to a desire to seek answers, leads to our own personal sense of trying to grapple with where it is that we are in this world. So what I want to do for a second is I want to look at this Tehillim. This is Tehillim number 19. if you want, you can take a second to just look at the Tehillim and see if you, in reading the Tehillim, can find that progression of wonder to awe to knowledge to our role in the Tehillim. So I'll give you a moment to look at the Tehillim. And if anyone wants to pipe in, you can tell me where you see that wonder. Where
I've been
and yeah, go on. Yes.
I've been studying Psalms with other people also, and Rabbi Michelle Fodham often will interchange the word fear for the word awe.
Ah, okay.
And she says,
And what?
"Don't
How does she?
think
And
of
what
it
does
as
she
a
say? What's the?
negative thing,
Yeah.
not a negative thing, but a grand, enormous thing."
So now, so you're probably familiar with this psalm. So tell me about the wonder awe that we see in this psalm. Where do we see it? What's being described in the early verses?
It can be anywhere. I started meditating about a year and a half ago, and I went on different apps, and one of them had very tiny things and how you could meditate when you were walking, when you were, I started the class. I mean, you might have seen I was actually outside. I was just finishing walking my dog. And one of the things that this person who was guiding the meditation said, constantly on a daily basis, when you're out, wherever you are, look for things that are awesome.
Great.
Flower, the way the cloud looks, the color of the sky. And I've always been one that really enjoyed nature and noticed that, and was kind of obnoxious with my kids because I'd go, "Oh, look how beautiful that flower is.
Yeah.
Do you notice this?" But I became very conscious, even more so than I had been, of enjoying those things.
And can I tell you, what's so powerful about what you're saying is that it's literally it's a universal, and I think if we look at the Psalms, an eternal, right, feeling, meaning that the mankind has constantly had a sense of awe by doing just what you were saying. And that's what David is instructing us to do. In order for us to connect to something bigger than ourselves, what do we need to do? We need to meditate on the world, right? Let's look at what do the first verses say, right? So the lead singer, a psalm of David, the heavens tell of God's glory. The skies proclaim his handiwork. We're looking not in the little, we're looking at the grandest of things, right? Day to day pours forth speech. Night to night expresses knowledge. What are we talking about here? Is day actually speaking, right? Is night actually conveying knowledge? What are we talking about, right? If we look at the idea that day comes after day, night comes after day, what are we learning about, right? We are acquiring the knowledge that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves, right? And speech isn't required for us to know that. All we need to do, right, is to look at these wondrous things. There is no speech, there are no words, there is no voice that needs to be heard, yet their music carries across the land. It's such beautiful poetry. Can you hear David saying this? Looking outside at the ocean, looking outside at the endless mountains as he's leading his sheep. There were in them, he says, in them he has set a tent for the sun, which emerges like a groom from his marriage chamber. I love that imagery of the excitement of someone who's just getting married. And that's when the sun comes out, it bursts out into the heavens, glowing like a champion about to run his course. It rises at one end of the heaven and circuits the other. Nothing can hide from its heat. So what does David tell us? what do we need to do to connect to God? What do we first need to do? Look at this beautiful world that he created with a sense of wonder. But then what's amazing, where does the psalm go? What's the next half of the psalm? You would think that we would wrap it up and say, oh my God, the heavens are beautiful. God, you are amazing. I love you, right? But instead, what do? We go to the teachings of the Lord are perfect, reviving the spirit. The decrees of the Lord are enduring, making the simple wise. The precepts of the Lord are just, rejoicing the heart. What are we talking about here? Where do we turn to now? After looking at how awesome the heavens are, right? Remember our Heschel's timeline for connecting to God, right? Wonder, awe, knowledge, right? We've had the wonder, and now Heschel says, and now David says, what do we come to now? An appreciation of the Torah, the words that God created. So if we can, another place that we have seen what David is telling us is there's awesomeness in Revelation, and because there's an awesomeness in our appreciation of Revelation, what do we also recognize? The awesomeness of the word that he has written and the idea that he has shared that word with us. And that's what David talks about. He says that word, we're not going to go through all the beautiful parallels in the poetic language of the way David describes nature, and he describes the light of the Torah. But that's what he says. He says that the Torah is more precious than gold, sweeter than honey, the drippings of the honeycomb. So here we have it, two pieces of something that inspires awe in the spiritual man, nature, and that the appreciation, the awe for nature, what does it do? It inspires awe in the word that the creator of nature gave to us, the Torah. And this was actually one of Heschel's favorite Psalms, just for this reason, because the secret to him to connection to God and to living a life of meaning was by appreciating the awesomeness of both the world that he created and the word that God gave us. And what does that inspire in us? And then we get to the end of the Psalms, and that feeling that Ellen describes, when we see that we have been given these two awesome pieces, we feel humble. There's a famous Hasidic rabbi that used to wear a shirt with two pockets, and one pocket had in it, for me, the world was created, and the other pocket had a note in it that said that I am but the dust from dust we come, from dust to dust we go. This idea that we are humbled in the presence of both of these awesomeness, the revelation, the word that God revealed to us, as well as the beautiful world that God created. And that's the end of the Mizmor. He says, your servant too is careful in them. I try to do my best in this world. In obeying them, there is much reward. But I'm going to make mistakes. Yet who can discern his errors? And he turns to God. He says, please help me to be my best me, because I am in awe of you, God. I am in awe. I want to be the human in this world that you created, but I need your help. I need you also to protect me from people, from bad things that are surrounding me. And you can also imagine David saying this in his life as well, his tumultuous life. And then he ends up, as David often ends up, often his Mizmorim end with a prayer, and it's a personal and sometimes universal prayer. And what is it? May the words of my mouth and my heart's reflection be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And what we're saying here, and we've talked about, is this idea that Psalms, right, are the words that we send up to God. And so when we are, and the Psalms are our means of connecting to God. And so what David is saying, and he's telling us as well, the reader of the Tehillim, is that we hope that our connection to you, God, is worthy of this beautiful gift, the beautiful gifts that you have given us. And in fact, and this is also connected to one of the themes that we're going to see coming up again and again in these classes, is this idea that Tehillim is not a random bunch of words, but in Tehillim is Tehillim is a book of philosophy. It is a how-to of how to live our life. And David, with those words, is giving God a personal request. He says, I'm writing all these words of Psalms. Please let people study them, not just as simple words of poetry and of song, but actually as Torah, as they should study them. The Midrash says that in these words, David is asking that God, for eternity, inspire the people who read Psalms to truly look at the words and internalize their message, to build connections to something greater than themselves.
When I
yes.
was a little girl, I
Yes.
sang, starting at 7 years old, I sang in
Yeah.
the choir at my temple. And the children's choir into the, up to confirmation, high school kids, sang at the Shabbat services on Friday morning. It wasn't just like kiddie services. And that last line, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, was the song, the prayer that we sung after the silent prayer.
Okay, thank you for reminding me, because that song, those words are exactly, and we talked about this last week, that the sitter, like if you know Tehillim, you understand prayer. If you know prayer, you can understand Tehillim, and in many sitters, after the silent prayer, those words are written, right? Because we taking, plagiarizing the words of David, right? We ask that God accept all the words that we have given him. And can I tell you, and one other thing about this Mizmor, if you look at the prayers that precede the Shema, right? In Shema, what are we doing? We are accepting the yoke of heaven. We are accepting God as our King. And in order for us to want to accept God as our King, we have two blessings. And the first blessing talks about the awe of the natural world, Yotzer Or Uvarei Choshech, that God created the light and the darkness and was able and help us discern between the dark and the light. And then the second prayer, before we begin to accept the yoke of God upon us, talks about the love of Torah. And Heschel says that the reason why the sages specifically chose those two blessings, right, to precede Shema, was also coming specifically from this psalm, right? Because this psalm says for my words to be accepted, for me to connect to you, God, what do I need to do? I need to connect to the two aspects of your revelation, creation and Torah and the word. So thank you. That was beautiful, Susan. And now I want to go to one other psalm, but first I want to I want you to think about if you could ask God for anything, and we talked about this before in the times that we studied, but when we studied the story of Solomon together, um, what would be your one request of God? What would be your one request of God? If you could ask God for anything, what would you ask for?
I would ask that God would help people be better to each other so that the world that my grandchildren grow up in will not be so angry and scary as the world we're living in right now.
Anyone, that's definitely a request. I was just talking to somebody like I grew up at a time without any anti-Semitism. And now when you see what's going on, it's we're concerned, for the world that we're going to lead to our children and grandchildren. What other requests might people want? So it's interesting. So our good friend Abraham had our good friend Heschel, what did he say? What did he want? He said, I didn't ask God for success or wisdom or power or fame. What did I want? All I wanted was to be able to wonder. And my father also would used to quote Einstein. He says also, the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science is that same word, wonder, right? Think about it. What motivates us? What motivates us to look at the world through a certain lens? What motivates an artist to want to capture something? What motivates a writer to want to write something? Right? It's their understanding that there's something out there, bigger than themselves, that they want to share and convey and understand. And I love this idea that both the mind of the philosopher, we're going to see also that Chagall also talks about this idea of looking at the world through a sense of wonder, that the artist, the writer, the philosopher, the rabbi, the scientist, right? What is the seed? What is the seed from where they all start? And it's from that word, that idea of looking at the world with wonder. And so with that, we're going to look at one other Psalm. And it happens to be one of my favorite just because my grandson's name is Adir, which means strength or majesty. And his name is in this Psalm all over the place. And this is actually a picture of him looking out at the Grand Canyon. And the other reason that I love this Psalm is because we also Shelley, we were talking about grandchildren, and the wonder of having the next generation come into this world. And this Psalm also talks about it, references that in a way of approaching the majesty of the world. And as we read this Psalm, I want you to think about how this Psalm might be different than Psalm 19, which also talks about the way of looking at the world with awe and majesty. And this Tehillim, the Psalm, is the one that was actually quoted by Maimonides when he talks about the way to get to the knowledge of God is through looking at his creations. And then we're going to see that there's another layer that is added to our outlook on spiritual outlook by this Psalm. So let's look at this Psalm for a second. Oops, let me go back. to there. So to the lead singer on the Gittit, we're going to talk about what the Gittit is, a Psalm of David. O Lord, our master, how mighty is your name throughout the earth. Your majesty extends across the heavens. From the coos of little ones and sucklings, you have founded strength on account of your foes, silencing enemies and avengers. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what do I shout out? What is man that you should be mindful of him? Human beings that you have taken note of him. Okay, here we are. We're back at that first picture of my son like climbing through the Alps. How does the psalm begin? What is the psalm talking about? Suzanne, you're my expert psalmist. Like what are we talking about? How do we enter into the psalm? What are we looking at? Thinking about Ma adir shimcha b'chol haaretz. How mighty is your name throughout the earth. Your majesty extends across the heavens. What are we looking at? What are we thinking about?
We're thinking about the universality, I think, of all people, not just Jews, but all
awesome.
people see God that way. And even I heard somewhere that in the Quran, in the Christian Bible, in our Tanakh, all of them speak of God as one. Even though in Christianity there's a Trinity, it all comes down to the oneness of them. And Allah means one, just the way when we think of it as one. So this isn't just us. This is a universality.
Yeah, keep going. But that is exactly the difference, right, between Psalm 19. It's one of the difference in Psalm 8. This is a universal psalm, right? This is man. You look, and we're going to see even that point even brought home a little. This is a monotheistic psalm, right? That you, man, right? What is man, right? That you should be mindful of him, right? This is talking about any man who looks up into the heavens, right? And who goes down to the heavens, and what does he look at next from the heavens? The little baby in the arms, the most majestic thing to the smallest creature. What does man have to say, right? What is man that you should like? Why, God, do you care about me? Right? Why did you create me? Right? I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers. You created the heavens, right? The moon and the stars that you put into place. And yet you created me. And not only did you create me, look what you did to me. You took a little bit of your glory, yet what does he say? Yet you have set them just below God. You put me, right? I'm right there under your pedestal, under your throne. Man, you crowned them, meaning mankind, with the glory and splendor. You took a little bit of your image of godness, Suzanne, right? You took your image of godness and you put it in man. We are your mirror. We, God, are your partner, right? You have made us master over your handiwork, laying the world at your feet, right? Think about David writing this. Think about David writing this both as the king and David writing this as a shepherd. And what does he talk about? I love this also because he begins, you can imagine, he's out in the fields, in the pastures, and he's looking at the heavens at night. And then he's looking at the sheep giving birth, or the children playing. And then he has this recognition of, wait a second, right? I have a place in this world, and God empowered me to do something in this world. I am in charge of the sheep, and the oxen and the wild beasts. They are all part of my Weltanschauung, my world, right? The birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, right? I am master too of this creation, like we know it. That's what God says on the sixth day. He says, "Vatem Tim Shobach, you are going to be in charge of this world." And whatever travels the paths of the sea, and it's a beautiful thing. What is this? Whatever travels the path of the sea, what is being spoken about here? So we could say it's just an extension of the animals that are in the sea, the birds, the fish of the sea, the whatever flows, whatever swims in it. But what one of the modern day commentators of Psalms says is whatever travels the paths of the sea, it also talks about man being able to conquer the world through, and we understand that more than anyone, in any other century, our ability to conquer the world through going to space, right? The and seeing the world that's beyond us. But yet, and this is where I want to talk about this amazing phenomena that I experienced a couple of weeks ago. So we think about, wow, how powerful is man that we can fly across the world, that we can fly millions of miles in space. But let me tell you something. God created a jet plane, a Concorde jet, way before we did. And in Israel, in October, November, in the Hula Valley, it just so happens that the Hula Valley is the epicenter of the migration of birds from Europe to Africa. And so in October and November, literally hundreds of thousands of birds of all kinds land in the Hula Valley, and some of them stay for a little while, some of them just kind of chill and they go on. But I learned the most amazing, first of all, I saw it, and I saw literally hundreds of pelicans landing, cooing, cawing to each, like talking to each other as they land, and then as they fly up in formation with the leader. They said, the guy there said that the more they talk, that means they're like the more they're getting ready to journey. So they had their own kind of their own navigation system. But when you think about it, do you know how many thousands upon thousands of miles these birds travel? Right. So we think we're so wondrous, but yet God, in his awesomeness, created in birds the ability to travel literally above the heavens, right? And have their own navigation center where they know they literally return to exactly where they had come from last year, and then they come back to Israel and vice versa. Wow. So as I saw that phenomena, I thought about whatever travels the path of the sea. I actually thought about David seeing these birds landing in his fields and seeing that phenomena year after year and saying, wow, right? We think we're so awesome, but look at what God has created. And then we end up with this psalm with, "Oh Lord," again, "Oh Lord, how mighty is your name across the earth." So first of all, just a little thing about how psalms work. I like to think of them often as an Oreo cookie. So there's the header, there's a closer, and then there's the cream filling in the middle and inside, which kind of tells you what this is all about. And what is this? What is the cream filling here? The cream filling is, what is man that you should be mindful of him? Human beings that you have taken note of him. So what's happening in this Mizmor, and this is where, Susan, I need your help. Where are we going with this Mizmor? Are we only looking at the world as being like, okay, I'm going to look at the majesty of God and be inspired to know him and connected to him? Or is there something that the psalm is telling us that is more, that awesomeness has to lead to? Anyone have a thought? So what this Tehillim is doing, is telling us that, you know why God gave you a bit of his glory? Because you have a job to do. You have a job to do in this world. And I want to go back and look at, and the job is not going to be simple. And I want to look at two pieces. One, Suzanne, is something that you referenced, that this is a universal psalm. And I want to think also about the trajectory of our life as Jews and also as humankind. Has our journey been simple? Is our journey simple? Absolutely not. And so in this Mizmor, and Heschel's journey wasn't simple either. That, remember I talked to you about the interviewer, Carl Stern. So one of the questions he asked to Heschel, he says, "You've lived such a challenging life. How is it that you are able to be and to live a life of joy?" And he says, to live a life without challenges is not to live life. And he says, look, even in the Bible, God struggles, right? It's not simple for God. And he says, out of the challenges comes the beauty. And that's what this Mizmor is a little bit about as well. He says, you know how man is able to fulfill his destiny, right? By wrestling, right? By seeing the beauty, by seeing the awesomeness, but also wrestling with the challenges that he faces. And so let's go to the first verse, to the lead singer on the Gittit. So we can look at the Gittit as simply a musical instrument that came from Gat, a musical instrument that was used by the Gittim, who are some of the Levites who sing in the temple. Or this is Hirsch's insight. He says, what is the Gittit? The Gittit actually comes from the word agat. And what is agat? Agat is a wine press. And what do we do in the wine press? What do we do? We crush the grapes in order to get out its full flavor. And so what the psalmist, what David is saying is, man, right? There is majesty in this world. There is beauty in this world. You are in charge of it, but your job is not simple. But out of the crushed grapes, out of the Gittit, what comes? What comes is the wine. So, and that's why also the Jewish people are compared to olives, because the taste of the olives comes out only once it is crushed. So it's a very powerful idea that here in the Tehillim, David is telling us to look outside, to live a life of awe, to live a life of, to appreciate the wonder in this world. But that wondrous and that amazement has to motivate us to want to make the world a better place, to partner with God. And he's telling us it's not easy. In order to be that partner, at times we have to play that Gittit, right? But if we do it, if we wrestle with those moments, like Heschel said, what will happen when we wrestle with these moments? When we wrestle with these moments, we produce the wine. And so now, Suzanne, you were talking about this Mizmor as being a ode to the universal striving, universal desire to connect to God. And that's exactly this interesting line. We say in the Psalm, from the coos of little ones and sucklings, you had founded strength on account of your foes, silencing enemies and avengers. What? We're in this beautiful Tehillim, and all of a sudden we're talking about the avengers, avenging our enemies. So it doesn't make sense that the flow is not that we're avenging our physical enemies, but what kind of enemies are we avenging here? I'm looking at these beautiful flowers, Suzanne, that you're taking care of. if we look at God's beauty, if we look at God's the babies that are born, what happens if those enemies of God, those people who are saying that God isn't relevant, God isn't present, God isn't here, when they look at and hear the coos of babies, right? Much like the heavens in our other Psalms, what's going to happen to them? All of a sudden, they too are going to believe. That's what we're talking about when you hear the sounds of a newborn baby, and you see the beauty and their ability to nurse at a mother's breast. What do you say? Oh my God, look at what this world, what God has given us in this world, and the negativity and the doubters begin to fade away. And what also is present is this idea of the hope that with all the challenges that mankind goes through, what also pushes away the enemies, right, that bring us down. It's looking at the hope of a new generation and what that new generation has to offer. So here we have it. We have these two beautiful Tehillims, both of them looking, following that Heschel trajectory of looking at the world with wonder, and then the wonder leading to awe, and the awe leading to our desire for knowledge and appreciation of the mystery of this world, and our desire to connect to that mystery, but also our responsibility, right, to do something with that the fact that we are also awesome. And that's where I want to end our class with talking about where Heschel takes this idea. But first I want to just talk about and sum up the concept. The way that Heschel looked at the world, and I think it's such a powerful way and it's such a hopeful way, is he called the term radical amazement. And he said, and he quotes, he says, everyone, it's a universal idea, right, Suzanne, that anyone who is not covering his eyes, it's a Hasidic, that's what the Baal Shem Tov says. You know what, it's so easy for us to walk around the world with blinders, and then, right, what happens if we walk around the world with blinders? It's like Heschel said at the beginning, at the end of his life, and that his final interview, I didn't tell you that what Carl Stern said is that more than any broadcast that he broadcast, whether about Watergate, Patty Hearst, the most requested transcript was the transcript of that Heschel interview. Something so profound in that. I think he said that at a certain point, more than 250,000 people requested the transcript of that interview of Heschel. And so what Heschel said is, if you live with your eyes closed, your life is stale. If you live your life with your eyes wide open, with radical amazement, then you understand that what is life about? It's not about needs, but it's about understanding that there's an end, that there's goals, there's something that we're working towards. And let's see what he says in his own words. Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement, to get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. This is a day that God created for me, right? And that, right, is also very much what it means to live a life that inspires in us a life of appreciation and gratitude. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. And what Heschel says also is that it's not only the grand things that we have to look at with radical amazement, it's the simplest things, it's the smallest things, it's and what my father studied. My father studied quantum mechanics, and both studied quantum mechanics, which deals with the smallest particles in the world. And he also studied he also was an astronomer. So that's what it means. He says, Heschel says, to live a life with radical amazement is to see, to connect to God through the biggest, like his biggest creations and its smallest, and also and not only the creations, but also to look at history in that way, right? To list, and that's what he says. The meaning of awe is to realize that life takes place under wide horizons, right? That's what we were talking about in Psalm 8. Horizons that range beyond the span of an individual life or even the life of a nation. That's Suzanne's life. Suzanne's point is that this is beyond the life of, and this is very much a concept of Heschel. It's not just about the Jewish pursuit of pursuit of connection to God. It's about that universal desire, right, of mankind to connect to the infinite, and what is enabled by that, what enables that is awe, enables us to perceive in the world, right, intimations of the divine. That's what Shelley and I were talking about seeing in nature. We were talking about this in the beginning, like this understanding that everywhere you look, you see God's presence, to sense in small things the beginning of infinite significance, to sense the ultimate in the common and the simple, right? To feel in the rush of the passing, the stillness of the eternal. And you should know that Einstein also talked about this. He says, I think maybe I am also a religious man. He says, because he says the same, a knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, our perceptions of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which only in their most primitive forms are accessible to our minds. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitutes true religiosity. So what does it mean to Einstein to be religious? Is to understand that we can't understand everything. I have a friend who's a physicist, and I said to her, does being a physicist connect you in some way more to God? Now, my siblings and I are constantly thinking about the questions that we wish we would have asked my father. He was our dad. Like, we didn't always talk to him about his life's work, as a physicist. And one of the questions I would have wanted to ask him is, did your study of physics actually, connect you in some way, more to God? So I asked my friends, and she said, it's interesting. She said that when like Newtonian physics, and like in the early days of physics, like the scientists thought that everything could be understood with formulas. But what quantum mechanics introduced to the world, and I'm just saying this in the most simplistic way because I don't understand it, what quantum mechanics is something called, and she quoted me, the Heisenberg principle of uncertainty. And she said until Heisenberg came in the 1880s, and I think he was one of the founders of quantum physics, you thought that everything could be answered with a formula. And what Heisenberg said was that, let me just quote it, he says that you cannot know both the position and speed of a particle with perfect accuracy. So that to me was awesome and wondrous. This idea that the more that you learn, the more you understand and connect to the idea that you can understand. And that, to Einstein, he said, that's what it means to be a religious person. And that's what Heschel was. And I think it's we're going to wrap up soon. I just want to end with two things about Heschel. So what did Heschel take all this radical amazement and this understanding that he was a part of something much greater than himself? He understood that he had to do. And he became best friends with Martin Luther King, two prophets, right? We mentioned at the beginning of class, 2 modern day prophets, and Heschel defined prophecy as the ability to hold man and God in your hands at the same time. That's what it means to be a prophet. And what he and Martin Luther King, and also to the idea of challenges, he said that the greatest gift to America was racism. What does that mean? Because the challenge of combating it, right, was going to be like that gitit. What was going to happen is that America was going to be a better place because it wrestled with this idea and was able to figure out a way to move beyond it. And Heschel most famously said, he said that to live the he says, better to quote him, morally speaking, there's no limit to the concern one must feel for the sufferings of human beings. That's Suzanne, to your part, right? This is a universal expression of compassion. But what does he say? There is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. That in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And that is what David was saying in his Psalms. He's saying that in Psalm 19, he says that the awe, the knowledge, right, inspires me to be a better person. And what's happening in chapter 8, in Psalm number 8, and that's what you were saying, Suzanne, the awe, the majesty, inspires mankind to step up and be responsible. And that is the message of Heschel, that he actually saw through the Psalms that we learned, that to live a life of radical amazement, of appreciation of nature, leads us to an appreciation of the creator, the world that he created. But we see that that wonder, not only in the grandest of beings, but also the smallest. And we see it not only in the here and now, but in the eternity of time and the history that God created. And what does that have to inspire us to do? Carl Stern said at the end of his interview, and what's so powerful is that the interview that Heschel filmed was 2 weeks before his death, and it was aired literally, I think, a week after his death. And the last question Carl Stern said was, "Give a message to the young people." And this was his message. He says to the young people, "Remember that there is meaning beyond absurdity. Know that every deed counts, that every word is power, and above all, remember that you must build your life as if it were a work of art." So with that, I invite us all to go outside or stay inside and just look at the world and our lives with a sense of wonder, and let that sense of wonder inspire us all to be a little better today and tomorrow.